Shalom. This is Rabbi Abraham Fisher. Today I'm speaking to you from Yeshiva Darchei Noam in the Teachers Conference Room. I hope everyone is well. This is Parasha Highlights and Insights. And this week's Parasha is Noach. Of course, a very familiar story, but there's a great deal that we can learn about it when we look at it very carefully. So, without waiting, let's take a look. First part of Noach, of course, is the story of the flood, of the Mabul. At the end of Bereshit, we were told that the world had become very corrupt, had become very wicked. All different kinds of evil that mankind was involved in. But it seems that which determined God's decision to destroy the world, to destroy all of humanity, is that mankind was lawless in the realm of robbery, theft. Nobody had private property anymore. No one respected the private property, the private possessions of anyone else, and that is complete anarchy. And it almost seems as though as long as the world was wicked in the realm of idolatry, God was prepared, as it were, to put up with it. But once there was robbery, wholesale robbery, that means there's no human unity, and there is no justification for the world to continue. And so God is going to destroy the world. However, Hashem finds that Noach is righteous. He's righteous in an otherwise wicked world. He's, as is very often quoted, the Pasuk says that he is righteous bidorotav, in his generations. And there are two ways of looking at that. He was righteous despite his generation, which means that he was exceptionally righteous. If he had lived in another generation, he could have achieved even more. The other way of looking at it is he was righteous as compared to his generation. He was in another generation, he might have just been an average good person. Nevertheless, Hashem decides that Noach and his family deserves to be spared. We've been told before that Noach is married, and that Noach has three children named Shem, Ham, and Yefet. And so Hashem commands Noach to build the ark, what's called in Hebrew the teva, which is like a big box which will float in the water, but which has no means of direction or propulsion. No sail, no rudder. It will just be carried wherever the water will take it. God gives Noach very specific dimensions for how the ark is to be built. 3 floors, very big. And the purpose of this is to house not only Noach and his family, but the animals that God is going to spare, the animals, the creatures, the living creatures that God will spare in order for humanity to continue afterwards. Otherwise, God would have destroyed all living creatures together with man. But if God is going to continue man through the descendants of Noach, therefore there's justification for these creatures to continue. So God tells Noach he will destroy all living things and spare Noach and his family. He commands Noach to bring various living things into the ark, and also to bring food for all of the inhabitants of the ark, of the teva, to eat. It's important to remember that up until this point, humanity is not permitted to kill in order to eat. That's something that we saw in Bereshit. So the same food that the animals are going to eat is the food that Noach and his family is going to eat. And so Noach begins the process of building the ark. One can only imagine what it must have been like to uh, to see Noach building this enormous structure, and people must have asked him about it, and his answer would have had to be that God is going to destroy the world, and He's going to spare me and my family, and it's very possible that the world scoffed at him. Uh, After this process of construction, and Chazal say that it took 120 years, so it's enough time for the world to find out and maybe to consider that Noach might know what he's talking about. Um, Hashem commands Noach to enter the ark, and in addition to the living things that he talked about, which were pairs of living things, male and female, also to bring 7 pairs of each clean animal, and as well as birds. And we find out later that Noach is going to use those animals, some of those animals, for sacrifices. And God tells Noach there are 7 days left until the flood is to come. The word for flood is mabul, that which washes everything away. And Noach obeys what Hashem tells him to do. The ark is built, the animals are brought in, the food is brought in, and the Torah tells us that at this time Noach is 600 years old. It's very interesting to point out that throughout the story of the Mabul, throughout this entire passage, uh, not one word of Noach's reply is ever recorded. Noach is obedient to God's will. He never engages God in dialogue, at least not anything that is recorded. He doesn't argue that perhaps the world should be given another chance, which might be an indication of Noach's level of righteousness. He's 600 years old, um, and the flood begins. And the Torah describes that the flood both comes from above and from below. All underground water bursts forth from underground, and at the same time, torrential rains begin. And it's at this moment that Hashem is simultaneously destroying the world and saving Noach and his family and all of the other living things that are in the Teva. It rains, as everyone knows, for 40 days and 40 nights. And as the waters rise, and as all living things are destroyed on earth, then the ark moves. The ark is borne up, carried up by the rising water, and it moves. It moves wherever the waters take it. And then, in addition to 40 days and 40 nights of unbroken rain, the water remains on the earth for 150 days. The Torah tells us, detail by detail, how long each one of these processes took, even gives us dates. After this whole period of time, Noach inside the ark with his family, with the animals, Noach probably taking care of the animals as well. He needed to do that. Uh, Eventually, the time comes that Hashem remembers Noach and all those who were in the ark, and Hashem is going to bring about an end to this period of history and start humanity over. Hashem brings a wind, which is to begin the process of drying up the earth, and gradually the waters begin to subside. It takes a long time because the mountains, the waters have been so high that even the highest mountains have been covered over. But as time goes on, the waters subside gradually until such a point that the ark rests on the top of a very tall mountain, the mountains of Ararat, which is in modern day Turkey. Of course, the world is still very, very wet. And so, as the Torah says, the waters continue to recede. Uh, Noach wants to know if the waters have subsided sufficiently. Is the earth dry? And so he sends out at first a raven. Uh, the raven leaves and it continues to fly back and forth. It doesn't return. Very likely, the world is not dry enough for the raven, but the raven does not want to return either. And so then Noach sends forth dove instead. The first time he releases the dove, uh, it flies and it returns because there's no place for the dove to rest. Noach waits another 7 days. He releases the dove again. And this time it returns with an olive leaf that has been broken off from a tree. That suggests that uh, the trees have been exposed, and they are surviving, or at least some of them are surviving. You can tell that this is a leaf, a freshly plucked leaf from an olive tree, and that indicates that the world is drying up slowly but surely. Noach waits another 7 days, releases the dove, and this time it doesn't return because it probably has found a place to rest. The waters recede more and more, the land dries. Eventually, Noach removes the cover of the ark and can see what is happening outside. But remember, the ark is on top of a mountain, so it is not possible to see what is happening in the lower parts of the earth. But this, uh, we are told that the land has finally dried out and an entire year has passed. Noah is 601 years old. At this point, Hashem commands Noah to leave the ark and to resume normal life. Throughout the time that Noah and his family and the animals were in the teva, in the ark, it seems that the men and women were separated from each other. The males and the females among the animals as well. The Because of the way that the Torah talks about Noach and his family, lists the men separately and the women separately. And that's an indication that during the time that they are inside the ark, they are to suspend all marital relations. But now that Hashem commands Noach to leave the ark, uh, we are told that the men and the women are together, both among humans and among the animals, and that means that the time has come to repopulate the earth, to resume regular life, and to begin to repopulate the earth anew. As Noach leaves the teva, he builds an altar and offers sacrifices to Hashem, which Hashem accepts. Noach is thankful to Hashem. Noach has brought these sacrifices from some of the animals that we would call kosher animals, what the Torah calls tahor, pure, animals that would someday be designated as suitable for consumption as well as for sacrifice. And this, our rabbis tell us, is an indication that Noach learned the Torah that would eventually be given to the Jewish people. When Hashem accepts Noach's sacrifices, Hashem says that he will never again destroy the world in a flood. There may be floods, but it will not destroy the entire world. Of course, it's possible for God to destroy, to punish in other ways, but never again the entire world to be destroyed by means of a flood. And so Hashem blesses Noach and commands him. Blesses Noach, his family, all of the animals, that they are to start the world again, and this is a blessing for them. And at this point, God tells Noach and all of humanity that from this point on, one is permitted to kill animals in order to eat meat. However, it's important that before eating meat, it is necessary to first take the life of the creature. This is a prohibition against what we call Aver min hachai, eating something, a limb from a living creature. That is prohibited for all of humanity. And this brings to 7 the mitzvot that all of humanity have. 6 mitzvot were given to Adam, to the first men, in the first generation. But as long as humans did not eat meat, this 7th mitzvah was not relevant. What are the 7 mitzvot in totality? Well, 3 of them are well known as the group of mitzvot that one would be required to die rather than violate. They are the prohibition against sexual immorality, murder, and idolatry. And the other 4 are one that we are just learning right now, prohibition against taking meat from an animal that's still alive, take the animal's life first. Also, blaspheming, cursing God. As the mitzvah after that is the prohibition against stealing. As we said earlier, stealing is the reason why God decided finally that mankind was not worth preserving. And the final is a positive mitzvah to create a legal system, courts, officers to enforce and judge the law. So at this point, Noach and his descendants are told that they may they may eat meat, but they have to first take the life of the creature. But they are reminded that just because they are permitted to take a life of an animal, that does not permit anyone to take the life of a human being. And murder in its various forms will be punished. If a human being commits murder, then that person will be punished by a human court. And God further blesses Noach and his family and all of the other creatures to be fruitful and multiply, because it's their responsibility now to repopulate the earth, and it would seem also to spread out, to go to various places in order to repopulate the earth. At this point, Hashem makes a covenant with the descendants of Noach, which is God's commitment that he will no longer destroy the world through a flood. The sign of the covenant is the rainbow. The rainbow, which is a natural phenomenon, which comes often after rain, is now given the additional symbolism of being a reminder that God has made a commitment, he's made a covenant not to destroy the world through the flood. The next section of the Parsha is what happens after the flood. And there's only one incident in the life of Noach that is recorded in the Torah, and it's not a very proud one, not a very complimentary one. After the flood, Noach surprisingly plants a vineyard and creates wine. And the Torah talks about how Noach, the great Noach, in this one unfortunate incident, becomes so drunk that he debases himself. He exposes himself inside of his tent. Noach is discovered by his son Ham, and when Noach comes to, awakens from his drunkenness, he starts off by cursing Ham's son, Canaan. It's interesting to point out that this is the first time that we have any record of Noach speaking. Up until this point, as I said, Noach is completely obedient to Hashem. I'm sure Noach spoke, but none of Noach's words are deemed worthy of God, including them in the Torah. And it's kind of unfortunate that after being spared, the first thing that Noach does talk about is this curse that he's putting on his his descendants. But he also continues by giving a blessing to his other two sons. The other two sons who helped to cover up Noach did not view Noach's shame. They turned themselves, they walked backwards in order to cover him up. And so Noach blesses Shem and Yefet. The rest of the Torah is going to focus, or eventually focus, on the descendants of Shem, specifically Avraham. And we'll see the connection later on in this parasha. The rest of Noach's life, there isn't much to say. It talks about how many more years he lives. There's no record of him having any more children, and he dies. It's at this point that we come to the next section of the parasha, namely the descendants of Noach. In other words, the descendants of Noach's three sons, Shem, Ham, and Yefet. And it is from here that we have the origin of the idea of 70 nations. Because if you look at the descendants of Noach as they are listed, they actually total 70 descendants. And these, say Chazal, are the 70 nations of the ancient world. First, we learn about the descendants of Yefet. There's a long list of them. If you pay attention, you may catch a few names that might be familiar. A lot of the names of the descendants of Yefet are associated with the part of the world that we call Europe. And then we have the descendants of Ham, many of whom are in Africa, although they move to other places as well, east and north. And among the notable descendants of Ham, we have Cush, which is Ethiopia, and the son of Cush, whose name is Nimrod. And Nimrod is the first one who's described as a mighty hunter. He seems to have created an empire. He was, it would seem, the first absolute ruler in ancient time. And he built a great deal, but a great deal of power with absolute power corrupts. And we'll meet Nimrod again later on in the Torah, but in another with another name. We're also taught about this cursed child of Ham, namely Canaan, and where they live is Canaan, the land of Canaan, namely the land of Israel. And then the focus is on the descendants of Shem. As I said before, Avraham is going to be a descendant of Shem, and so there's a greater focus on them. You'll see that the Torah wants to talk about all of the descendants of Noach, but it's going to focus on Shem, so it leaves Shem for last. And among the notable descendants of Shem is Avel. And the descendants of Avel, of whom Avraham is one, are called Ivrim, which gives us the word Hebrew. That's at least one explanation for that name. And the Torah also talks about the lands of the sons of Shem, and that is to the east, modern day Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and those areas. The next section of the parasha is another notable generation, the generation of the dispersion. After the people of the earth multiply, remember that God blessed them that they should multiply, but also that they should spread out. The Torah notes that at first they all are united by a common language. Our rabbis teach us that that common language is Lashon HaKodesh, Hebrew, and that unity becomes the basis of a major mistake that they make. They come to a certain place. It's a place that would later be called Babylon, a valley, and they decide that this is a place to stay, to build a city and a tower, because they do not want to disperse. They're using their unity in the wrong way. Their unity should drive them to a higher spiritual purpose. Instead, they are going to go against the will of Hashem, who wanted them to disperse and to repopulate the earth in various places. And so Hashem decides that this is not a worthy enterprise, and so Hashem wants this building to stop. Now, He doesn't destroy them. First of all, because their mistake is potential. They haven't done anything particularly wicked just yet. Uh, and of course, Hashem has vowed that He's not going to destroy the world through a flood, um, but also because they are unified. And when humanity is unified, even around a mistaken goal, Hashem is more willing to allow them to remain. But He wants to undermine this misuse of their unity, and He does so through language. They are unable, God confounds their language, and they're unable to communicate to each other. And therefore, since they can no longer communicate, they abandon the building of this city and this tower, known as the Tower of Bavel. Bavel in Babylon means confusion or confounding. And as a result, they disperse. The last section of the Parashat Noach shows the lineage, tracing the lineage from Shem all the way to Avram. Not talking about all of the descendants in every generation, but focusing on each subsequent generation, how old each one was when the next generation, the next link in the chain was born, because now we wish to focus our attention, or eventually focus our attention, on Avram. So from Shem, we have a list: Arpachshad, Shelach, Aver, who's been mentioned before, Peleg, Reu, Serug, Nahor, and Terach. Terach, who's the father of Avram. Torah tells us a little bit of background about Terach, that Terach has 3 children. One, Avram, and Avram is married to Sarai, who has no children. She is barren. Nahor, who is married to Milcah, and a third son named Haran. And Haran, doesn't say Haran's wife's name, but Haran has a child, and his name is Lot. Lot will be important as we continue. Torah tells us that Haran dies young, and that will be why Lot will have to be cared for by the rest of his family. The last episode in the parasha is where Terach decides to take his family from the land of the descendants of Shem, the descendants of Ever, from a city called Ur, which is in Babylon, modern-day Iraq. And it says that he has the intention of traveling, bringing the entire family, and relocating in Canaan, which we now know as the land of Israel. However, he doesn't complete the journey. He stops in Haran, not to be confused with his son Haran. This is Haran. The city of Haran is in modern-day southern Turkey. Terach is taking his family and traveling from the southern part of what would nowadays be Iraq to what is nowadays known as the land of Israel, which is traveling to the west. However, he doesn't travel directly west because there's a lot of desert in the way. Instead, they travel along the river, the Euphrates River, most likely, and therefore stops along the way, along that arc, stops along the way in Haran, and does not complete the journey. And Terach lives out the rest of his life, the rest of his 205 years in Haran, and that's where the Parsha ends with Terach and his entire family, that is to say, his two surviving sons, Avram and Nahor, and their wives, as well as Lot, uh, Terach's grandson, and they are living in Haran when we come to the end of the parasha. For special insight, I would like to focus on the special event, the shameful event, I guess we'd call it, of Noach debasing himself. The Torah says, this is after the flood, Vayachel Noach ish adama. Noach started to be a man of the earth, a tiller of the soil. In other words, after the flood, Noach decides that he is going to devote his life to being a farmer. Vayita karem, and he planted a vineyard. Apparently, he was the first to plant a vineyard. And then, unfortunately, vayesht min hayayin, he drank from the wine that he had produced. Vayishkar, and he became drunk. Vayitgal betocho halo, and he uncovered himself within his tent. I'd like to share with you a very fascinating insight from the Abravanel about this incident, which might make what Noach did give us a little bit more sympathy for Noach's situation. It says, the Ravanel writes, "V'sipera katuv," the text relates, "She'im heyot shekodem hamabul hayu sham gefanim le'echol anavim," although there were, before the flood, there were vines to eat grapes. In other words, grapevines already existed before the flood, but Abravanel posits that the only purpose to which grapes might have been put was to eat the grapes. It's very likely that Noach took some of the vines onto the ark with him. After all, he did take various things for eating, so he could have taken vines along with him. So although there were grapevines in existence, but the purpose of that was just to eat the grapes, hine lo haya kerem misudar shurot la'asot yain ad sheba Noach. There was no such thing as a vineyard which organizes, which arranges the vines in rows from which to make wine. I don't know enough about wine production, but it seems that it's only when you raise the grapes this way in rows that you're able subsequently not only to eat the grapes, but you can process the grapes in order to make wine. So what Noach did was he started the process of creating a vineyard in rows. That was Noach's first contribution. שמזמורות הגפנים שהכניס עמו בתיבה נטע כרם מסודר שורות כדי להוציא יין מהענבים, because from the vines that he brought with him into the ark, from those vines he planted a vineyard in an organized way, in rows, in order to produce wine from the grapes. So the next contribution of Noach is to raise the grapes in such a way, not just for eating the grapes, but for producing wine. The next line of Bravanel deals with the question, why does Noach wish to drink wine? I would not have written this on my own, but the Abravanel suggests this. Ulai, perhaps, he says, ki ka'asher katz b'chayav mipnei mei ha'mabul because he was fed up with his life because of the waters of the flood. Noach was a survivor of a tremendous catastrophe, a catastrophe that was brought about through water. It's true, the people who were destroyed may have deserved it, and Noach and his family deserved to be spared. Nevertheless, it's possible that Noach afterwards feels perhaps guilty. Ravanel's words are katz b'chayav. He was fed up with his life. Uh, it's possible that what the Ravanel is talking about is something that we sometimes identify as survivor's guilt. He may have felt, why did I survive while so many died? And it's also important that maybe Noach is questioning whether he could have done more to bring the people back to greater righteousness, to also be righteous. But after the flood, the Abravanel says he says ulai, he was fed up with his life because of the water, and therefore, bikesh la'asot yain lishtot mimenu, he sought to make wine to drink from it. Kedei shelo yishteh od mayim, so that he would no longer drink water. The reason why the Ravanel is suggesting Noach wanted to make wine is because he couldn't stand to drink water which brought about the destruction of the world. Velo yir'eh otam le'olam, nor would he see it, meaning the water, ever again. So rather than simply criticize Noach for his behavior, and there is room to criticize, but the Abravanel suggests something a little bit more sympathetic, that perhaps the reason why Noach turned to wine is because he never wanted to see water again. It's a bit sad, but it's also a little bit more understandable why Noach would behave this way. It's really hard to imagine how Noach could deal with the rest of his life. He does not have any more children after this. He just lives out the rest of his life, aside from this one incident, which leads to his debasement and his cursing some of his progeny, but also, and this is important to remember, blessing the other children, blessing Shem and blessing Yefet. And that suggests some hope for the future of humanity. I think it's a thought-provoking Abravanel, I think worth discussing around the Shabbat table. I thank you all very much for joining me. This is Rabbi Abraham Fisher, thanking you again for coming to listen to Parsha Highlights and Insights, and looking forward to speaking to you again very, very soon, next time. Shalom.